this is all stuff that took me sometimes years to learn and figure out. I'm going to write it down so other people can benefit from it and don't have to go through the same learning curve and can maybe take a shortcut and, do things quicker and better, and don't have to wait until they're 41 years old to be, somewhere where they want to be health-wise. I actually eat, more than just meat. I'm not a, pure or strict carnivore. I did it for a little bit, but figured out that there are some carbohydrates that I seem to be benefiting from, especially, in the realm of CrossFit workouts and trying to restore glycogen stores. Just, relying on gluconeogenesis is not super effective for what I do and what makes me feel great. But getting there was like a kind of a long winded road a little bit. It started out with just removing added sugars from the foods we consumed based on a documentary that we saw on Netflix many years ago, Fat, Sick and Nearly Dead or something. I keep forgetting the name, but I think that was the title of the documentary. And it basically said, oh, Americans eat so much added sugar every year and it's unbelievable, and it's the cause of all disease basically. And so my wife and I said, you know what, let's go through the pantry and just trash everything that has added sugars. And we ended up with an empty pantry. And I'm like, okay, so turns out that most of the foods that we, thought were okay to eat are not. And from there, that really sparked my interest in reading labels and figuring out, okay, what is it? How does the food that we eat impact our health and well-being and how we felt? And also with the background that I had struggled with gut issues for most of my life, especially what I guess is known as irritable bowel syndrome. So that, I don't exactly know that there is a good definition, but if it's not any of the other diagnosable diseases, it's IBS kind of, that was
Sure.
what I found out. And my dad had it too, and his dad, and my grandfather died actually before I met him of colon cancer. So there is, that gut issues are in the family, and I thought, well, that's just what it is. My dad's been struggling, has been trying all kinds of diets, nothing really worked. But it kind of, made me interested in trying to figure out how can we improve our health, and especially in regards of what we teach our children, because that was around the time when we were getting ready to have kids and we wanted to provide them with the best possible nutrition after they stop breastfeeding, of course. And a buddy of ours, coincidentally, he was on a paleo diet but never really talked much about it. He was not one of those obnoxious guys who would try to convince you to do something. He would just be the weirdo in the corner, who does things differently, and nobody, ask any questions. But at some point I'm like, so what is this paleo? And he tried to explain it to me, and I'm like, well, it kind of made sense. And I started looking more into paleo, and I'm like, well, this is the diet we need to be on, because obviously if humans have eaten a certain way successfully without all of the chronic and metabolic diseases that modern humans are plagued with, then that has to be the diet we need to pursue. And so I woke up one morning and I told my wife, I'm going to do paleo starting today. But I wasn't the one at home cooking, so me saying I'm going to do paleo meant it was impacted by that. And she hadn't done any of the research. She didn't really look into it, and she just thought, I mean, no, you're not just going to do paleo unless you cook for yourself and you do everything yourself. Because I'm not going to just, cook, different meals for everyone just because you want to do a crazy diet. So it was a little bit of an argument. It took a while, and after a while, she did her own research and figured out, well, this is actually what we want to do. And so we did paleo, and the beginning of our paleo journey was really a carnivore journey almost, because paleo for us meant a piece of red meat and some sort of side dish. And the side dish was usually a grilled zucchini. That was our go-to. That was our paleo meal. So it was at least animal-based, if not close to being carnivore, because it was a lot around mostly proteins, really. And lo and behold, all of my gut issues disappeared. And I'm like, wow, this is amazing. Not from one day to the other, but within a week or maybe 2 weeks, my gut issues disappeared, and I'm like, wow, this is just, we just changed the way we eat, and suddenly, I feel so much better. And for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to feel good. Because before, if you would have asked me, how do you feel? I would have said good, I mean, because I
Yeah,
didn't know
but you
any
don't.
better, I
Yeah.
didn't have I had a baseline, and I thought that's, how feeling good feels. And then suddenly I knew, okay, this is what it feels to be good. This is what it, to feel good. This is what it means to have mental clarity and to not have, gut issues all the time. And then I was really hooked, and I started more and more researching. And at some point I figured out, well, paleo is okay, but it's keto. Keto is what we need to do because all carbohydrates are bad. And so, I again went to my wife and said, I'm gonna do keto, and she's like, let's not go down this road again. We just changed everything to paleo. I was raised in Costa Rica on rice and beans, and we removed all of those foods that I, used to eat. And now you're saying we can't have any carbs. Are you nuts? And I'm like, well, but understand, carbs are bad, high blood sugar is bad. And we made the transition slowly again. She came on board, she kind of liked it. But after about 2 or 3 years, we figured out that, well, no carbs at all, or very few, we are not feeling great. As we're feeling way better than before making any changes, but not as good as we felt on paleo. And I also noticed that some of my gut issues returned, and I'm like, how is that possible? I'm eating a better diet, but now I'm having issues again. But what we didn't take into account was that the modern keto diet contains a lot of foods that aren't necessarily paleo compatible with, how humans have eaten for a long time. And that particularly, means nuts and seeds and all of the things to make, pastries and keto friendly cakes and all of those things. Almost everything is nut butters. There's a lot of nut butter going on in the keto community. And so I noticed that, okay, keto is not really the way to go either. And so I said, you know what, maybe it's carnivore, because humans, even though we are, Bill Schindler said it's we are omnivores because of technology, not by design. We have the tools to make certain foods nutritious that our physiology is not really designed to digest and metabolize, be it grains and all of the things that we don't have. We don't have a rumen, we don't have, a crop like the chicken. We don't have so many things that are necessary to digest most plant-based foods. And so carnivore kind of, made sense to me. But I also quickly realized that doing carnivore and doing CrossFit in particular, where you constantly empty your glycogen stores, it's just very taxing. And I noticed that my sleep deteriorated. I woke up a lot. There was a lot of what I think was like, glycogen depletion, and then my cortisol went up because I was running out of fuel, before gluconeogenesis could kick in and then replenish some of those glycogen stores. And my thyroid levels were a little bit off, nothing dramatic, but I could notice like a couple of changes and just the overall feeling of, well, not feeling 100%. And that led me into a modified carnivore diet, or how, what Paul Saladino calls an animal-based diet, which is very much centered around animal foods, especially, the meat, organs, fat, etc., but includes the least toxic plants, and in particular, seasonal sweet fruits and some veggies. And that's kind of the diet that we're on right now, that allows for plenty of flexibility, even in social settings, because, food, I like to think of food as, a pure source of energy, but in reality, it's so much more. There are cultural aspects, religious aspects, maybe there are so many facets to eating that reducing it to pure energy makes it difficult in our modern society. And so by going the animal-based approach, I can pick and choose, kind of within the full spectrum of macronutrients, while still maintaining relatively stable blood sugar levels, and my metabolic flexibility. I think that's one of the most important things that I pay attention to. Am I still metabolically flexible? Is my fasting insulin low? Mine is typically between 1.8 and 2.4, so very much on the lower end. I'm super insulin sensitive, regardless of how many quote unquote carbs that I eat. I mean, I stay within certain limits, of course. I'm not on a high carb diet by any means. But that has been working fairly well for us, for the kids, for Kathy as well. And that's what we've been doing for the past, I don't know, maybe 2 years or so.
Okay. I was just going to ask, and yeah, just to edify you a little bit, like one thing you have your blog, right, where you go in depth on like a ton of different products, but I think the thing that you do that's really cool in terms of like, you're not just like doing this for yourself, you're also publishing a lot of the stuff that you're doing on articles in your blog, and you're giving in-depth insight into like what's happening in your body. So you're looking at insulin, you're looking at like how your metabolism is performing, and all these different things. So you do get tons of insight there. So when you guys started to add like some fruits and veggies, what are those? Like, what are ones you're allowed to eat and not allowed to eat? Well, I shouldn't say allowed, but which ones do you choose?
Yeah, so we eat a lot of berries, and we have, we grow our own berries in the garden, but berries are a favorite among everyone. Mangoes, simply because it's the fruit that my wife grew up with in Costa Rica, and the kids love it too. Um, some bananas, sweet plantains are a huge favorite. Everyone likes them. And so those are most of the fruits we eat. Figs we eat, we have a fig tree. Dates we eat as well.
Yeah, I had some of those
Apples,
at your place. They're good.
apples and pears. Yep. So
Yeah.
those are some of the sweet fruits that we eat. And a couple of veggies like squashes. We grow some ourselves and we buy some. And if we de-seed and peel them, cucumbers and zucchini squash.
The thing I really like, when I see you, I'm like, yeah, that's the diet I want to be on, because I want to look like
Mhm.
Michael Kummer. He's got it all in line. But it's such like a common sense approach. It's like, hey, we've developed in a certain way eating certain foods. It doesn't make sense to, in the last 100 years, totally radically
Right.
change that. Why do you think there's so much? Like, it seems like there would be mass adoption of that concept, but because it just kind of common sense. Why do you think there's not a lot of adoption of it? And it's growing, but it's not huge.
Yeah. No, it's not huge. I think there is just the incentives in our society are in the wrong places. I think from a grower perspective, from the companies that sell the food, I think the entire food system is set up in a way where, growing monocrops is more, you make more money with monocrops. They are easier to store, easier to transport. I mean, there are all the reasons why, certain foods grew a lot over the past 100 years or so, or 200 years. Um, but I also think that most people don't really appreciate that food has an impact on your health. And not only, the regular Joe who hasn't studied or spent any time looking those things up. It's even among the medical community, that there is very little appreciation for what diet can do to your health. And so it's not even a factor for many people, and combine that with, all the advertising, misleading advertising and misleading information. You not only get, obviously, every brand is trying to sell stuff, and what they put on their label might not necessarily always reflect, the truth. Everyone kind of knows that. But at the same time, if you get wrong information from authoritative sources, be it the USDA or be it, your doctor, you can, you just follow along with that. We just actually took our kids to, and I already regret we did, but to their annual checkup yesterday or the day before yesterday. And one of the questions was, are you guys eating enough veggies? And I was about to say, no, fortunately not. We eat a lot of meat, because veggies are mostly toxic. But I'm like, I don't even bother. And in the doctor, it wasn't, if I looked at, the doctor, if she was in or appeared to be in perfect metabolic health and, with a certain, physique or whatever, I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. But she was clearly metabolically not healthy. And then when she said, oh, my kids, I just made them mac and cheese, and I'm like, I was getting like an anger stroke inside. I'm like, you have no idea, and you're the medical professional, how humans should be eating, and in particular kids, who obviously don't have the resources to look stuff up. For the most part, they rely on the parents, and if the parents don't know, because even the medical professionals, consulting the parents don't know, then no surprise that we are heading in that direction. We've been heading in the wrong direction for decades.
Yeah, I've made the comment a few times. It's like, if you want to see how much the medical system cares about diet, look at the hospitals. Like,
yeah
it's like
yeah
you get pudding
yeah
and chicken tenders, and
yeah
like you could have surgery the next day and be drinking
yeah
like coffee and sugar and all that stuff, which
uh,
it's just kind of so backward, because that's like, those are supposed to be not the gatekeepers, what am I trying to say, but like the people that are promoting health, and really the
right
foundation of health
yeah yeah
is what you're putting inside your body. So it's just so backward and asinine that the standard of care doesn't go towards anything really related to diet. I shouldn't say anything, but 99% of the focus is on like the prescription they give you, the drug they give
yeah
you, some sort of intervention that does not require food.
yeah yeah that's exactly true. And that's why I don't really see that change. I think it will change, and it has been changing within a certain segment of the population who are into oh, I don't believe anything I've been told. I want to look that up myself. I want to read studies. I want to listen to people who might have a different opinion, and then based on that form their own opinion. There is a segment of the population, but unfortunately most don't have the time or the desire, or both, to, and in reality, I mean, it's my full-time job kind of, and yours, I think too, to learn and to share what we learn. Most people don't have the time and the bandwidth and the resources, to do what we do. And so they need to trust someone. And unfortunately, very often, people trust the wrong sources because they are, on paper, the authority. They just happen to have wrong information,
Yep.
and keep peddling that.
Well, and just speaking of sources real quick, I'll drop your website's like michaelkummer.com, right?
Yeah.
And it's spelled just like it sounds. I'll have it in the notes or something down below. But you introduced me to White Oak Pastures, which is a farm that does, I know they
Yeah.
do at least cattle. I actually found some beef down here in Florida while I'm here at this
Oh,
local
yeah.
store. I was kind of surprised. I was
Well,
like, that's pretty cool. So when you're looking for where you're sourcing your food from, like White Oak Pastures, why do you
mhm.
choose somebody like them?
I usually pick sources that understand how animals are supposed to be raised, meaning in line with the cycles of nature, be it the soil cycle, the carbon cycle is just one of them. It just happens to be a very popular one. The water cycle, and the people who understand that, hey, if we raise cattle properly, it's not only good for the environment, it's good for the animals, it's good for everyone involved. And those are that's typically what I look for. So is it regeneratively raised meat that I'm getting? What are the animals being fed? I mean, it's pretty clear with cows it should be grass, but if it's chickens or pigs, what is the feed? Because all of those animals get supplemental feed, much like our backyard chickens do as well. There is no way around it. And so what are they fed? How are they butchered? What is the animal welfare overall? How are they treated? Are they in a raised in an environment that's natural to them, meaning pasture raised, etc. And so those are some of the attributes that I look for.
And
And I'm
so if
willing to
like,
pay extra for that because it's unfortunately often more expensive than commercial.
it is more
And
expensive, but I think, if you're pretty strict on your diet, you'll probably have a lot of cost savings too on other sides that you might not foresee. Like, yeah, you can't be like as dirt cheap, but just by virtue of cutting out, ice cream or some of the eating out or like the different elements, like those add up too, or, getting Starbucks coffee. So I actually did, it wasn't like super clean in terms of having like the best protein available, the best vegetables available. Like my ideal is more of like a paleo diet to a degree, that's protein heavy. And I don't follow that entirely. Like I still eat my cookies and whatnot, but I'm not gonna lie. But I was like, this was a few years ago, and inflation has hit, so it's gone up a bit. Maybe it's $15 a day, but I was like, I wonder if you can eat like a healthy paleo diet and under $10 a day and still get, and I was still working out quite a bit, so getting good calories in it. And you could. You just had to be okay with eating the same stuff over and over. Like,
Yeah,
so you
and
can eat healthy
yeah.
on relatively cheap. It's just boring, and I think that's a big obstruction for people more than the price is like they just don't want to, you know.
Yeah, I agree. And going back to the pricing, I mean, there are obviously, some influencers online who, only eat steak and nothing else, or only eat ribeyes, and that can get, expensive, especially if you want to do it grass-fed, grass-finished. But I think in particular with red meat, I think eating any red meat especially red meat from ruminant animals, is better than not eating red meat. So if you have to pick between the best organically grown veggie and a piece of regular grain-fed beef, I would go for the grain-fed beef any day of the week.
Really?
Yes,
And why
because
is that?
they are just, I mean, assuming that the beef was raised without hormones. So you can get, if you go to Costco, let's say, or to Sam's Club or what have you, you can get, decent grain-fed meat that's hormone-free for a reasonable price. And that meat is more nutritious and has none of the anti-nutrients and toxins that all plants inherently have. And I'm not necessarily talking about sprayed on toxins, but the natural defense chemicals that every plant has to various degrees. Not all plants are exactly the same. But even, that one thing that we learned as well, organic doesn't mean free of pesticides or free of herbicides. It just means
Yeah.
that there is a list of allowed ones. And even those, it says, don't, wash your hands, wash everything, don't put it into your mouth. So they are not healthy either for you. Maybe better, I don't know. But the bottom line is that plants are an inferior source of nutrients, and meat is not, and has none of those issues. So I would go for the cheapest, assuming it's at least hormone-free cut of meat. Can be stew meat, doesn't have to be a steak even. If you have a slow cooker at home, you can make any meat tender, and delicious. Add it with maybe some bone broth, and it tastes delicious, regardless of if it's grass-fed, grass-finished, or whatever, choice, or prime, or whatever the quality rating is. You can make it taste good, and it's relatively inexpensive. Of course, I always recommend buy the best meat you can afford. Fortunately for us, that means we can usually go with grass-fed, grass-finished from, regeneratively sourced farms. But if we couldn't, and sometimes we, when we're at Costco and the only flank steak we can find is, from grain-fed, we do that,
Yeah. And we should probably define a little bit too of why grass fed, grass finished is the healthiest form of beef, because we've alluded to that. But like, if somebody raises an animal, say improperly, the hormones are kind of obvious, right? You don't want to supplement hormones into your body, but say they're just like eating grain and corn and whatnot. What does that do to the animal that you don't like?
I mean, the reason why farmers eat grains is because it fattens the animal. Same as it fattens humans. If you eat a lot of grains, you get fatter quicker, and the same is with the animal. But that weight gain is not necessarily always, well, it's not healthy, because cows are not supposed to be as fat as they often are before they get slaughtered. So with, the obesity of the animal, basically comes along certain, health conditions that might not have enough time to fully develop into a serious issue because the cattle get slaughtered before, but they're already, those pro-inflammatory issues in the cow at the time of slaughtering. So the animal was likely already sick to a degree when it was slaughtered. And then you're eating the meat of not of an animal that wasn't 100% healthy anymore. It was, if nothing else, overweight or obese, and we know from, humans that someone who is overweight or obese has likely other issues that come along with that condition. And so that's one thing. The other thing is just, animals are not supposed to consume the seeds of grass. They are supposed to consume the grass. Grains are not something their digestive system can handle very well. And as a result of, sure, you've heard, plenty of the cases where there's an E. coli, outbreak in a, cattle farm or in a meat processing plant or what have you. That specific strain of E. coli that is so dangerous for us happens to be the result of a bacterial development in the cow's digestive system because they are fed grains. You barely hear any of those issues in environments where the cows are 100% grass-fed and grass-finished. And so that's another reason, to avoid the risk of contamination of those bacterial issues, grass-fed, grass-finished is usually better. And then there are some little details where you could argue, how much of a difference it really makes, but the fatty acid composition in meat from grass-fed, grass-finished animals is better, more advantageous to us, more beneficial to us, especially when it comes to omega-3 versus omega-6, where you want to have a somewhat even ratio. So omega-6 should not be significantly more than omega-3 to make sure that it doesn't cause any inflammation in your body. And we see there is a slight difference between grass-fed, grass-finished and grain-fed or grain-finished animals. It's not significant, so it shouldn't be the deciding factor whether or not you get meat, period. But it's yet another factor that makes grass-fed, grass-finished a little bit more nutritious than the grain-fed.
Well, and it's probably more nutritious too because they're getting their proper nutrition, right? In the way that they digest it. Yeah. And so like each pound that you eat or whatever, you could think of it as being more efficient in a way for your own body. But yeah, I've heard that too about the ratios between the omega-3 and omega-6, and I was actually going to ask about that. But yeah, it's essentially inflammatory to our own bodies, and so when you introduce poorly done meats, like you said, probably not the worst thing in the world, but it's another thing for your immune system and your inflammatory systems to have to deal with. So so you're kind of positioning plants in a more negative light based on the idea that they were not something that we've eaten throughout for long periods of time throughout our development as a species. Like it's not something that was a part of our diet. So the thought process is we should not be including a lot of these plants because they contain things that our bodies would recognize as toxic because we haven't evolved to basically consume those. But would there be any limitations on that thought process? Like, would you consider like botanical medicine or herbal medications with that paradigm?
I think there is a difference between using something for a medicinal purpose and fuel. So I think I'm not arguing that there are certain plants that can be used to treat certain conditions, or that have a certain effect on the body that might be positive or might be negative. I mean, there are poison and there is medicine, and sometimes the dosage makes the poison, as they say. So I'm not arguing with that. There is certainly a case for medicinal plants, no doubt about it. I think there is also a place for plants in our diet if properly prepared. And I think that's really the crucial part that most people don't understand. And as I alluded to before, the human digestive tract is not meant to consume predominantly plants. We can eat almost anything, but there are consequences to eating certain things a lot. And there is usually no consequence to eat. If you only eat meat, you can survive on only eating meat. You can thrive on eating only meat, especially if you include, if you really follow a nose to tail approach, meaning you eat the organs, you eat, bone marrow, you eat the fat, and everything in between. There is all the nutrients that humans need to not only live, but to thrive is contained in an animal if you do a nose to tail diet. There are also nutrients in plants, but those are typically locked up and not easily accessible. And there is a reason, there are several reasons for that. But if you think about it, if you take like one step back, no living thing wants to be eaten, wants to be killed. Everyone wants to, to have kids and grow and and proliferate. Animals run or they fight. We just happen to be sometimes, we have either rifles or bows or spears or what have you to overcome that obstacle, right? And we can run, or now we have, whatever. We have invented technology, and even, before then, primitive tools to hunt animals. Plants don't want to be eaten either, but they can't run away, and very often they don't fight in the traditional sense. So they use chemical warfare to prevent the most important parts of the plant from being eaten. And one of the most defended parts of a plant is the seed, because that contains everything the plant needs to grow, followed by the leaves, which are important usually for photosynthesis, etc. So there are certain parts of a plant that are detrimental to the plant's health. If they are gone, the plant will die. And so the plant uses chemicals to defend those parts of that plant. Whereas sweet fruits, on the other hand, they are usually, the plant wants you to eat their sweet fruits, which is why they are, nice and bright and with cool colors, and they are sweet. So you want to eat them, and then spread again the seeds. The seeds itself, they're not meant to be eaten. So grinding up the seed and chia seeds or whatever is a bad idea, because you're basically grinding all of those defense chemicals into your food and unlocking them in a way that can harm your digestive system and cause inflammation and a whole host of issues down the line. But the good news is that humans have figured out certain ways to unlock the nutrients in plants and mitigate some of those toxins. And I'm talking about fermentation. I mean, in the easiest case might be heat. Boiling or cooking can reduce some of those issues or some of those toxins. Fermentation, sprouting, soaking. There are a lot of things that a lot of technologies we've developed over the years that can mitigate the issues and unlock some of those nutrients in plants, so we can consume them to various degrees depending on your health, etc., and make them part of our diet. That doesn't mean we should be eating them predominantly, or we have to eat them, because otherwise we don't get the nutrients we need. That's not true. But there is at least a case to be made that if we prepare those plants properly, we can make them part of our diet, or at least many people can. Unless you're so metabolically unhealthy and sensitive or what have you, then you probably can't have any of that, because there are always remaining toxins. You cannot remove them completely. There is one class of plants or plant toxins, however, that is impossible to mitigate, and those are oxalates. So all your if you're drinking, and those are like in leafy greens, spinach in particular, and kale. So having like a kale spinach smoothie raw is probably the worst thing, the unhealthiest thing you can do to your body. And that's considered to be like a health smoothie, a post-workout kind of thing. And so oxalates, impossible, at least based on my knowledge, to mitigate. Many of the other things you can tackle with fermentation, like making sourdough bread, for example, or even the sweet potatoes that we had when you guys came over, they were fermented for 5 days, So most of the starches have been broken down and converted into carbohydrates that are either not as digestible anymore, so they don't raise the blood sugar, and we've mitigated some of those carcinogenic compounds that usually are created when you fry starches, when you combine heat with a carbohydrate or a starch. And so there are ways to eat plants. You just have to know how. Most people don't want to spend 5 days in the kitchen to make sourdough bread like Kathy did the other day. They don't want to soak the sweet potato fries or potato fries for 5 days before eating them. They don't want to go jump through the hoops to make that food accessible and digestible for humans. They just eat as is, and that leads to issues.
Yeah, it's kind of one of those things. You can't afford not to be healthy, because it's going to come back to bite you. It's going to take years off your life, or your quality of life is going to diminish such that you're not productive, or it always comes back to get you if you don't prioritize your health. So even if there's time savings now, it in the long term does not save time.
You
And the
pay one
oxalate,
way or the other.
yeah, exactly. There's no way around it. Yeah, and the oxalates are an interesting thing because that's been a more predominant discussion in the last year, it seems like. But my one of my friends, Dr. Mandy LaGreca, I don't know if you know her. She's
No.
a clinical nutritionist and she's really good. She knows her stuff. You guys probably should link up a little bit. It'd be interesting to see what you come up with. But she does pretty in-depth testing. So she did for me Nutraval and then Tree of Life genetic testing. And so like she's seeing a lot of times there are so many issues associated with oxalates. I think interstitial cystitis is a big one. Kidney stones is a big one.
Yeah.
A lot of different issues they can cause. But she's also on the side, like based on genetic predisposition, that some people can handle it a little bit better than others. So there are some people that just respond extremely poorly to oxalates and have a lower threshold of tolerance for those kinds of things. But I guess getting a little bit practical with the vegetables. And by the way, those sweet potato fries were very good. So credit to whoever made them. But how do you ferment them? Like
You just a salt brine, fairly simple. So you just take, what you want to do is potatoes always have to be peeled because most of the toxins are in the skin. So you peel them, you chop them into you slice them into, chipped, if you want to make chips or fries into fries, to increase the surface area. Basically, you put them into a large glass jar. You weigh the jar before, so you know how much the empty jar weighs. Then you add water, and then you take the combined weight of the fries and the water, and you multiply it by 2.5%, and that's how much salt you add in to the water. You stir it, and you let it rest at room temperature for 3 to 5 days, and they're ready to go.
By what measurement are you using for the salt?
So we typically convert everything into grams and then just take whatever weight we have in grams times 2.5%, and then it turns out to be, I don't know, maybe 250, well, I don't know, 125 grams or whatever of salt. So it's usually a fairly large amount depending on how much, how many fries you make. Pour it in, stir it, and then we stir it once a day, and yeah, that just makes the bacteria do its thing.
So yeah, again, and just to go back to your website, like you have a ton of amazing information on there between like product reviews and tools, interventions, diets. When did this website and this kind of I don't want to say anal tracking of metrics and health data, but to a degree it is. But you're the right person for that, right? Because you really believe in what you do. You're super passionate about it, and you embody like the principles that you learn about in health, and then you track everything. So how did that come about that you started actually publishing this information for other people?
It actually started with health at all. It started with photography and technology in 2012 when whenever someone knows you're in IT, you're the go-to support guy if the computer doesn't work, And so I got kind of, fed up with repeating the same tips and tricks and information over and over again. I'm like, I said, I'm going to write it down. If someone has email issues, go to that article, read it, and follow the instructions so I don't have to tell you again. So that's how it all started. And just based on the passions I had at the time, which were technology and photography. And over the years, then, as health and fitness became more prevalent in my life, I started shifting a little bit away from, I kind of dropped photography altogether, but technology was still there. But then everything was mostly around health and fitness. And I figured, well, this is all stuff that took me sometimes years to learn and figure out. I'm going to write it down so other people can benefit from it and don't have to go through the same learning curve and can maybe take a shortcut and, do things quicker and better, and don't have to wait until they're 41 years old to be, somewhere where they want to be health-wise.
Sure.
And that's how it started.
Yeah, that's kind of cool that you transitioned into it that way with that concept of like, hey, if I'm going to do something once, I may as well publish it so other people can learn from it. So what are some of your favorite things that you've come across that you like to, beyond food, a little bit beyond diet? Because like, even though that's the most important thing, it's not as enticing as the ice bath or the novelty of the cool stuff. So what are some of the things that you really gravitate towards in terms of optimizing your health?
I think the older I get, and that's a weird saying, I never thought I would actually start a sentence with that, but the older I get, the more I realize that, going back to the basics, trying to simplify things, not make things more complicated, not try to use technology to solve every little problem. Very often, we are looking for solutions to problems that we've created ourselves in the first place.
Yeah.
And by just removing the problem, you can stop looking for a solution, be it with bad sleep. I mean, if you go back to the basics, like, don't eat after sundown, go to bed when the sun is down or when it's dark, protect your eyes from artificial light, once the sun is down, and all that, expose yourself to natural sunlight first thing in the morning, stare into the sun, not painfully, but if you can, just look into the sun first thing in the morning, doing like all of the
You
things.
don't mean direct eye contact with the sun, do you? You mean
No,
just
in the morning when the sun is up, I look directly into the sun. I mean, if
really?
it starts like being like uncomfortable, I look like slightly to the side, but usually, especially now in the winter, the sun is soft enough that I can actually look directly into the sun.
What does that do?
And it basically it makes sure that my circadian rhythm is on track. That's a very strong signal in the morning that it's time for cortisol to rise, to get going. And that on the flip side, then means my melatonin release and stuff is on par when the sun goes down. So that only doing that, only having that direct sun exposure in the morning does wonders to your circadian rhythm and to the quality of sleep and to the ability to fall asleep quickly.
And you've probably measured that too.
I mean, yes, but I don't have like a specific like one-man study just for that. But I just noticed that on days where I do that, and on days where I have the most sun exposure, I tend to sleep the best. So there is a very interesting correlation between those things. Whereas on days where it's cloudy and where I don't get my sun exposure in the morning, I seem to be more all over the place during the day. I get hungry like at weird times, and it might take me a little bit longer to fall asleep, or I don't get sleepy at the exact same time that I usually would get sleepy. So it certainly has an impact on my circadian rhythm, and that obviously influences then how I sleep. So what I'm trying to say is, instead of saying, okay, this or that gadget has really helped me improve my sleep. Yes, there are things like the temperature controlled mattress, or blue light blocking glasses and all of those things. Yes, but at the same time, if you turn off the lights in the evening and use candles, maybe, and get your sun exposure first thing in the morning, then you can achieve very similar results. And you didn't really have to spend any money. You didn't have to, do anything special. You just have to go back to the basics, how humans have lived for millions of years, or however long, you think humans were on Earth. But for a while, at least, humans have done certain things just by necessity. Once the light was out, they wanted to do stuff because now they could see. Once the sun was gone, they couldn't see anymore, until they discovered how to make fire on purpose. And it was time to, wind down and go to bed. There was no having dinner, after sunset, likely, unless they had fire again. But then it was the light from the orange and red lights and then wavelengths from fire, and not from artificial blue light, So just going back to those basics can make a huge impact that can also simplify your life. And speaking of simplifying, when we moved into this house, I decked it out with all the smart gadgets, the home was a smart home, basically. Every light switch I could control from my phone. And just recently I started like removing all of that stuff. Because it's all EMF exposure, the more Wi-Fi devices I have on the network, the more exposure, then I need my Wi-Fi on at night. Otherwise, stuff doesn't work. But by going back, you're simplifying your life, and you feel happier with less, and you're healthier, without spending a ton of money on stuff that you don't need.
Yeah, happier with less. That's a really good line, because it's like, I think the more you just attach yourself to things, the more you feel like, I don't know, almost scarcity. Like you almost have to have the thing, and you're attaching yourself to some like material that really has no meaning, but then it somehow takes away from you. And when you kind of free your life up by losing that attachment to like a physical thing or a tool or a nice car or whatever it is, like you become so much more free in a way.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, EMFs are interesting because it's like I don't know why people are so resistant to the concept of like frequencies having some sort of negative effect because it kind of seems to make sense. Like, I know this is kind of a bad correlation, but we can put somebody in an electric chair and they'll die,
Mhm.
right? Because it's an interference
Correct.
with the electrical systems in their body.
Yeah.
And so with like electromagnetic frequencies, we're making a small interference, but it's so constant that it's like
Hmm.
dripping water that just doesn't stop. And so it's yeah, it's carcinogenic, has all these negative side effects. What's kind of your are you you're actively trying to get rid of EMFs, but what's some of your thoughts and ideas around just EMFs in general?
Yeah, I mean, EMFs are obviously are a natural occurrence. So it's not something that, humans made up. We just happen to pile on, significantly more of those EMFs that we've ever been exposed to in human history. And I think that's the problem. It's not that, EMFs are inherently bad. I mean, the Earth itself, is a source of EMFs. There is a magnetic pole, so there is all of those things are going on in nature. But I think we're just, doing way too much of it. And we don't know yet for sure. I mean, there are certain indications where we can tell, okay, if you have a phone close to your head, it causes tissue warming. So we know those things already, but to what extent that impacts our health in the long run is still what up for. We'll need to wait and see, but I don't want to wait and then find out that it was bad. Like with many other things, I told you the other day, I think most things that humans have invented turn out to be bad for our health. And EMF, we haven't invented them, but all the electronics and all of the exposure um, that we have in our modern lives, I think that one day we'll find out that was probably too much. And I don't necessarily want to wait. I want to do things today already. So like, turning off Wi-Fi at night. I mean, even, I have stickers around to kind of, prevent the EMFs going this way and they're going more that way. That doesn't mean they're completely removed. Otherwise my headphones wouldn't work, but they're at least mitigated to a degree. So I'm trying to do things to reduce my exposure without necessarily, removing, going into the woods and just living, without any electricity whatsoever and any, electric devices. But I'm trying to remove things and remove especially things that are not necessary. Like having smart light switches is not necessary. Because they're not reliable anyway. So they always aggravate me when I'm in bed and say, hey, good night. And then, one of the two switches doesn't work, or two switches don't work and I have to get up and turn them off manually anyway. I'd rather know that I don't have that capability. And when I go to bed, I turn them off like we did back in the days. So those are kind of, low hanging fruits. I think, don't hold, your phone next to your use headphones, ideally wired. Don't put your laptop on your lap. I mean, without having like some sort of barrier. I sleep with an EMF blocking blanket. So most of my body is at least covered, from anything that might come, from the sides or from the top. So those kind of things that we try to, slowly remove our exposure without being too radical about it. And yeah, just use candles at night. It's so refreshing. If you ever had an power outage for a while, and you had to use candles, it's actually so much nicer. It's just expensive because beeswax candles are expensive, but it's actually the more pleasant light. It's more romantic. It's just cozier. It's just better overall than the crappy artificial chunk light that we sit under most of the days.
Yeah, and in our country, we're not very on point with our lighting situation. Like
Mhm.
we're very about like the hard lights, harsh light. It's
Yeah,
very bright and it's not very moderated. Some other places just are better with using like soft lighting or light that's a little bit more
yeah,
reflective, which is at least a step up from
yeah.
what we got in general. So based on like all this lifestyle stuff like just all the things that you kind of been through and have been learning for the last 10, 15 years, however long it's been, you decided to make your own, which you actually gave to me, and I have been taking the beef liver pills and
Mhm.
heart and spleen pills,
Mhm.
which are
Yeah.
why did you end up making those?
because I figured that I've always been, well, my wife really was the one saying that, hey, you should look for some physical product to you, because right now or for the most part, I've only been selling content, if you will, so digital products that's at the mercy of Google and all of those platforms that I leverage to put my content out. And so I always wanted to have like a physical product, and I've been thinking, well, I've been testing so many different supplements all over the years, and at some point I usually stop taking them. What is something that I could envision standing behind and using for the rest of my life? And I'm like, well, I strongly believe that organs are the best source of nutrients, most bioavailable, most readily available source of micronutrients, meaning vitamins and minerals and cofactors and coenzymes and enzymes, etc. So that is something that I think humans could benefit from for a very long time. And so I decided I'm going to go with a freeze-dried version of those organ meats, so they don't have the taste and the smell for the most part. You can just, pop them as a capsule. It's still real food. It's not really a supplement. I mean, it kind of, looks like a supplement because it comes in capsule form, but it's really just freeze-dried real food, be it liver or heart and spleen, in a capsule that you can conveniently take whenever, when you're traveling, when you're at home, and you get the same micronutrients as compared to eating the fresh version of that organ.
Yeah.
I mean, you lose maybe 2 to 5% with the freeze drying process, but practically speaking, you get everything that fresh liver or fresh heart or spleen has. And there are already a couple of companies on the market that provide those, and good quality products that I've been recommending and still do. But there were certain things that I didn't like. One is most of those supplements are fairly expensive. So if you're on a budget, and you can't get and don't want to eat maybe fresh liver or fresh heart or whatever, then I wanted to make it in a way that's affordable. So more servings per bottle for the same price or less. And I also wanted to ship in glass bottles, because one of the other things that we've been doing is remove pretty much all plastics, especially food storage containers, from our household, because they're typically loaded with what's called xenoestrogens, that are chemicals that mimic the sex hormone estrogen that can cause stuff in your body that you don't want to. And so I wanted to do glass. And at the time, and I think that's still the case today, there is no beef liver supplement, freeze-dried beef liver supplement that comes in a glass bottle with a metal lid. And so I'm like, I want to do this. I want to, provide value and do it in a way that's eco-friendly on the one hand, but also the healthiest way of delivering that product on the other hand. And that's why, we came up with beef liver first, and then later on added heart and spleen. And then this year, there's going to be a couple of more supplements that we'll launch in the next couple of months to kind of complement that portfolio.
I look forward to seeing what those are. But yeah, it's basically like a Whole Foods multivitamin. I mean, it does a lot more than that, but it's coming actually from the liver or the heart or the spleen.
Yeah.
I remember when we were talking earlier, I can't remember exactly what it was, but you were saying something about the difference between freeze dried, and then there was another method of like producing these organ meats that you didn't like, and I can't remember what that was.
Heat drying is the standard, or way of conserving those foods or making that powder. And with the heat, you just lose some of the heat sensitive. It's the same as when you cook liver. I mean, with cooking or with heat in general, there's always there are some nutrients that become more bioavailable when they are heated in meat, for example. But there are also a lot that are heat sensitive and that get degraded. And so the balance is really, I think, on not heating, I would say. So that's why when I eat liver, I just have a little piece and eat it raw, to get the most nutrients out of the product, or out of the food. And the same goes with when you turn it into powder. Freeze drying preserves more of the nutrients than heat drying. But the other nuance to that is, a lot of the products that are out there are defatted, and doesn't sound like anything bad, because you just remove the fat from the liver. I mean, what's the harm? Well, the problem is hexane, which is a chemical that you don't want to have anywhere close to food is used to extract the fatty acids basically from the raw material, and then it's gonna be and then it's removed. It's like when you use canola oil. I mean, if you look at how canola oil is made, with all this chemical sludge, and it's deodorized because you couldn't smell it otherwise, so it smelled so bad, and with all of those chemicals to kind of extract the stuff that they want and leave the rest that they don't. It's just not, it doesn't lead to high quality food. And so that's what was another reason that I wanted to have something that's non-defatted or undefatted, meaning no hexane in the process, and freeze-dried, which is the most gentle way of pulverizing, I guess, organs.
Yeah, and they're happy cows, as I understand too. Grass-fed, grass-finished.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
The best kind. What are some of the other products that you're going to make this year?
So the next one is likely going to be a bone and marrow, which is basically just an entire bone ground up, including the bone marrow, and it's a great source of calcium and phosphorus. So especially for those who can't handle dairy or don't want to, consume dairy, humans are actually very capable of extracting calcium from bone. So you can either chew in a bone if you want to, or you can, take the ground up version and get your calcium and your phosphorus and some of the other trace minerals in there. And then all of the, the growth factors and stuff that are in bone marrow, of course. So that's one thing. And then I think I'm also going to do a collagen, a multi-collagen with all different types of collagen, from eggshells and egg membranes and fish and cartilage tissue, of course. So that's another thing, because that's also something we use on a regular basis. I like, collagen in my yogurt. And then probably an organ formula for pets, because people have also realized that kibble is not the greatest food for either dogs or cats. Both of them are carnivores, pure carnivores, 99% carnivores. And so, adding some organs in the form of powder that you can mix with the regular food is a great way of, adding some of those nutrients that animals and humans, benefit from.
Yeah. Our cat, we probably don't feed it the proper nutrition, but maybe once you get some of those pills around, we'll at least be throwing that in there, get some other
powder, so it's not pill. I mean, you can already open the pill and pour it over. That's what some of my customers do with the liver and heart and spleen, but it's going to be just powder, and you can scoop it out and just mix it in with the food.
Awesome. Well, so if people want to find more information about kind of what you had to say, where can people find you, or where would you direct them?
michaelkummer.com is probably a good starting place. It's the blog where, if you click on health, then you see all of the different, categories of articles that I have there. There is one pillar article that I highly recommend to anyone, and it's called How to Live a Healthy Life. It's basically, it's a pillar article that goes over all of the pillars that make up a healthy life, nutrition being one of them. Shop.michaelkummer.com is where they can find our supplements, and beyond that, I'm actually not active on Instagram. I do put out content on Instagram. I consume very little, but there is, if you want to see what we are doing in the backyard with the chickens or what have you, there is the my mkummer82 Instagram account. There is the Kummer Homestead account if you want to see in particular, how we do with the chickens and the bees and the upcoming rabbits. And then I have a YouTube channel where I publish semi-frequently, typically, related to the blog post that I put out. I have done an accompanying YouTube video there as well.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate it. I mean, we probably should have touched on it a little bit more, because you also do like some homeschooling, some stuff with your kids. You have some cool concepts there. I know you do. Your wife was saying doing child-led schooling, essentially, where it's like based on their strengths and what they're interested in. But maybe we can save that discussion for another time. So I really appreciate you jumping on though today. Thank you.
Absolutely. I appreciate you having me. Thanks, Micah.